Hey y'all, grab your bell bottoms and your protest signs because today we're headed back to the 1970s when America decided it was over pollution ruining its vibes. Now, the 1970s weren't just about disco and Watergate, though we could spill a lot of tea there. No, friends, this was the decade when Americans started realizing that dumping chemicals into rivers and pumping smog into the air might not be the best idea. I mean, who knew, right? Let's set the stage. Factories were treating rivers like personal trash cans. Cars were guzzling leaded gasoline like it was the elixir of life, and air pollution in big cities was so bad that people in Los Angeles were literally choking on the smog. Oh, and let's not get the Cuyahoga River in Ohio because it was so full of oil and industrial waste that it caught fire multiple times. A river on fire. Yeah, America had a problem. April 22nd, 1970, the first ever Earth Day. Millions of people hit the streets to demand action against pollution, toxic waste, and destruction of wildlife. And let me tell you, politicians took notice. Richard Nixon, yes, Tricky Dick himself, wasn't exactly a tree hugger, but he knew a political win when he saw one. By December 1970, he created the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, which meant industries now had someone watching them to make sure they weren't turning America into a toxic wasteland. And just to prove he was serious, Congress passed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, putting stricter limits on pollution. I know, laws that say you can't poison people. Groundbreaking. Now, you know it wouldn't be the 1970s without a few disasters making everything extra dramatic. Let's talk about three of the biggest environmental horror stories that America had in shock. First up, Love Canal, New York. Sounds cute, right? Wrong. Imagine you're living your suburban dream and suddenly your basement starts oozing toxic sludge. Well, that's exactly what happened in Love Canal, a neighborhood built on top of a massive chemical waste dump. For years, Hooker Chemical Company had been dumping 22,000 tons of toxic waste into the ground there, covering it up and calling it a day. Fast forward to the 1970s, and people, especially kids, were getting sick. We're talking birth defects, epilepsy, asthma, and even chemical burns from playing outside. When residents found out, they went into full protest mode, and after years of fighting, President Jimmy Carter declared it a federal disaster in 1978 and started evacuating families. This mess led to the creation of the Superfund Act, a government program that forces companies to clean up their toxic disasters. So, yay for accountability. March 28th, 1979, the day America almost had its own Chernobyl. The 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania had a serious malfunction, causing the reactor to start melting down. If it had fully melted, it would have unleashed radioactive catastrophe all over the East Coast. People panicked. Some started fleeing the state. Others waited in their homes terrified they were going to glow in the dark. In the end, it wasn't as catastrophic as it could have been, but public trust in nuclear power collapsed, and for decades, no new nuclear plants were built in the U.S. Okay, so at this point, you're probably thinking, wow, an inspiring time for the environment. And yeah, it was, but not everyone was cheering for the EPA. In fact, big business was fuming. Companies started arguing that all these new regulations were too expensive. They claimed the EPA was killing jobs and making it impossible to compete in a global economy. And let's be real, American businesses love one thing more than they love clean air: cheap labor and big profits. So what did they do? They started moving their factories overseas. Yep, instead of following strict pollution laws in the US, companies shifted productions to countries with looser environmental regulations. The end result? Cheaper goods for Americans. More jobs lost in American manufacturing. Worse pollution in developing countries. This is what we now call pollution outsourcing. A fancy way of saying we didn't fix pollution, we just sent it somewhere else. But before you go thinking the 1970s were the start of environmentalism, let's rewind way back to the early 1900s when President Teddy Roosevelt was out here creating national parks like they were collector's items. He was basically the OG of conservation, setting the foundation for everything that's happened in the 1970s. So there you have it. How America finally started taking pollution seriously. The T? The 1970s were chaotic, but without this environmental awakening, we'd probably be living in a real life version of Wall-E right now. That's the spill on the green movement of the 70s. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more tea on turning points in history. And remember, reduce, reuse, recycle. Bye.